Good afternoon, Ethical Foundations to Commerce students. Welcome to Unit 3, Resolving Ethical Dilemmas. So if we have to just look at the structure of the course and where we're at currently in the process, you've already looked at what exactly is ethics, which would have been done in Unit 1. Unit 2 focused on foundations and your role in ethics. And now we're finally going to be looking at how to go about resolving different types of ethical dilemmas. So in terms of the chapters that you need to look at in the textbook, it would be chapter 15 and chapter 16. The focus of this particular lecture will be on chapter 15. Chapter 16 is an example that you can actually do for practice purposes in terms of getting your exam technique. And it's also just a very good question that has been made available in chapter 16. So the learning outcomes for this particular lecture is the 4 outcomes that you see on the screen. And this lecture will be done over 2 parts. So part 1 will focus a lot on the theory, and part 2 will then focus on an application case study. And this will also then be able to give you the tools that would be required in order to do a question relating to ethical dilemmas. So let's just get started and start looking at what exactly is a moral dilemma. So if we have to break down the word dilemma, a dilemma is we're not sure what to do. There's so many outcomes. Which is the right option? So these are just some of the questions that will come to mind when we're thinking of a dilemma. So when it comes to a moral dilemma, or in other words, an ethical dilemma, here too, there will be a number of options or a number of outcomes, and we then need to make the right decision in making sure that we actually choose the right outcome. Now, if I have to just take a step back and ask myself, okay, is it easy to actually solve a dilemma? The answer is not as straightforward as yes, it's extremely easy to actually resolve a dilemma, or no. So this is why during this module, we are trying to equip you with a number of tools that you can use to try and assist you in resolving ethical dilemmas. Now, when it comes to moral dilemmas, there are 2 types of moral dilemmas that we're looking at: a personal moral dilemma and a social dilemma. So we are going to be looking at some examples with regards to the 2. But in summary, a personal dilemma is a dilemma that you experience within yourself. So when you and you alone are just confused as to what should I actually do in this situation? And a social dilemma is where there's more than one party involved in that particular dilemma. So it can be maybe 2 groups of people arguing over some sort of an ethical dilemma. So just to summarize that again, personal moral dilemma is a dilemma within yourself, and a social dilemma is where there is more than one party involved. So let's just look at this particular example of a personal dilemma. We can see that this boy in this scenario shows that he found the $60, and then he's like, okay, I can do this with the $60. There's a number of things that I'd be able to do with these $60, but is it actually the right thing to take that $60 and, make it your own and do whatever you want to, or should he actually return it? And the fact that he is not sure as to what exactly to do, that is what then results in the dilemma aspect of this particular personal dilemma. And obviously, in the end, he then decides he is actually going to return that particular $60. But can you see that in this case here, the dilemma was just within himself? He was not sure on what exactly to do. Now we're going to look at RIMS, or rational interaction for moral sensitivity. Now this forms a big portion of this particular module. Now here, what I want you to note is that with the RIMS strategy, or rational interaction for moral sensitivity, here we are looking at where there are more than one party involved in a particular ethical dilemma. And how can you actually go about in resolving that particular dilemma? So RIMS is just another tool that you can then add to your ethical toolbox that will then be able to assist you in actually resolving ethical dilemmas. Now, one thing I just want to say is that as complicated as it actually sounds, the RIMS strategy is actually a very easy strategy. And what I am also going to do is try and give you some exam technique tools that you'd be able to actually use, and it would actually make it easier when attempting the assessment. So let's dig a bit deeper into the RIMS strategy. So if I have to ask myself, what exactly is the purpose of RIMS? So RIMS is basically a strategy, in summary, to solve a ethical dilemma between more than one group. So, it can be 2 or 3 or 4 groups, but it's obviously more than one group. And it's basically coming to a solution that will then try and satisfy both parties, or if it's 3 parties, satisfying all the parties that are actually involved in that particular moral argument. Now, if we have to just look at some of the basic meanings, rational is we need to be logical. So we need to come to some sort of a logical solution, a solution that actually makes sense. Then there has to be some sort of a moral dispute. So it has to be an ethical dispute. And we'll dive a bit more deeper into the aspect of moral dispute, and we'll dig a bit more deeper into the concept around moral. And then it has to come, you have to basically land up with a morally sensitive decision. So it's what is the best for all. So it shouldn't be a selfish decision. It should be a decision that then benefits all parties involved. Now, there are assumptions that the RIMS strategy is actually based on. And each of these assumptions will be discussed in detail over the next few slides. But the 5 assumptions are: moral dissensus is a given. Moral dissensus does not equal ethical relativism. Dialogue can produce solutions. Focusing on motives is futile, and only moral arguments are allowed. Now, some of the key words from here is dissensus. And dissensus in its most simplest form is everyone has opinions, and that is a given. The reality is what I may believe in is something that you may actually disagree on. So the reality is that everyone, and the fact that we are human, is that we are going to have different opinions. Motive, a motive is the reason behind actually doing something. So the purpose behind, doing something. Futile. So something is considered as futile or pointless if, for example, if you're studying this course and you just decide like, oh, I don't really feel like doing this, and you're doing it just for the sake of doing it, is your purpose actually truly there? It's actually then considered to be futile. It's pointless actually doing something when you don't actually feel like doing it. And then arguments is that, if you're not happy with something, and if I'm not happy with something, or if you're happy with something and if I'm unhappy with it, it is going to result in some sort of a argument. So an argument then just basically comes about as a result of difference in beliefs, difference in opinions, or some sort of a difference that we may see. Then the first assumption is that moral dissensus is a given. This simply basically means is that as humans, we're always going to disagree on something. So the fact that, we're faced with difference in opinions, that is one of the assumptions behind the RIMS strategy. And that is why the RIMS strategy has actually come about, is that it has identified the fact that people will have different opinions. Moral dissensus does not equal ethical relativism. So this basically talks about moral dissensus. So ethical or a difference in opinions relating to ethical issues is considered a different scenario altogether, because the RIM strategy only focuses on ethical arguments. But ethical relativism, in summary, translates to difference in cultural belief systems. So if it has to do with something that relates to a cultural belief system, the RIM strategy says that no, we cannot use RIMs to solve an issue relating to cultural differences, because each one that follows, some sort of a culture or, your cultural belief system, that is not considered to be ethical. So this one here is just saying that anything that results or comes about from cultural differences would not then fall under the RIM strategy. Dialogue can produce solutions. So any argument in reality is that if we talk about it, if we communicate about it, that will then result in solutions. So that is why a big part of the RIM strategy is to go about and talk and have that conversation in order to come to some sort of a solution. And then focusing on motives is futile. So you cannot just focus on your purpose or on just what you want. So you shouldn't be selfish in what it is that you are arguing about. And this is where we say it's so important that it has to be an ethical argument. And, if you use the good self other test, it shouldn't just be good for you. It needs to benefit others as well. Only moral arguments are allowed. So here again, there's the emphasis on that it has to be an ethical argument. And again, you can use your good self other test here as an example. And that is what your RIM's assumptions are actually based on. And in summary, it just comes down to there has to be an ethical argument between more than one party. And as a result of these arguments, we then need to go about discuss these issues that we may have and then try to come to some sort of a solution. So the RIMS strategy can be broken down into 3 main steps. Step 1 is generate and evaluate all arguments, identify the implications, and step 3, find solutions. So it's a very simple strategy. And as we dig deeper into the RIM strategy, you'll see that it comes down to very simple and basic exam technique, but it's also an opportunity to do well in an exam situation. So if we have to look at step 1 is basically looking at who are the parties that we actually have involved and trying to understand what exactly are they arguing about. And the other point here is that whatever it is that they're arguing about is this actually an ethical argument? Then the second point, identifying the implications. So here we are looking at, okay, what are the positive things that are coming about as a result of this particular argument? And what are the negative things that are coming about as a result of this particular argument? And then finally, we look at the different solutions that can be exercised with regards to the argument that we have at hand. So if we have to just look at this and we have to just ask ourselves logically, what exactly is the RIM strategy? It's basically asking yourself these questions. Who are the parties involved in this particular argument? What exactly is the issue? So what is the problem that they are arguing about? Or what is the issue that they're arguing about? And then we're like, okay, now that we know what the problem is, why are they saying this is a problem? And then finally, what can we actually do to resolve this particular problem? Then once we've actually established answers to this question, the next thing that you can do is you get writing, or you then have your 3 headings being the generate and evaluate your points of view, identify the implications, and find the solutions. So that then forms the framework of your solution. So what I want to bring your attention to is that RIMS is an easy section where you can score really good marks, but there are a number of points where you'd be able to get easy marks. And just good exam technique is always about practicing questions. But when doing questions, it's so important to ask yourself, okay, so where are the easy marks? So for example, generate and evaluate arguments. By stating that point, you are going to get an easy mark. Then the next thing is, who exactly are the parties that are arguing? So let's say it's me and a friend. The two parties would be myself and my friend. So just by having that heading, by saying, okay, me and my friend, and just having those two headings will then give you a mark for each heading. Identify implications, and then having it spread between the two headings, and then find solutions. So here we're looking at the different solutions and that we can come about. You then will get your marks for those particular points. But if you use this particular slide as your guide in terms of formulating your response, there are a number of easy marks that you'd be able to obtain. So when it comes to practicing the questions for a RIMS question, it's always important to understand what exactly the question is asking of you, and then how the answer is presented. I've just provided you with that particular framework, and that framework is going to help you in assisting you in generating a good solution. And also notice how many marks is the question actually asking of you. Now, if it's a 20-mark question, there are already a number of easy marks that you can get for that particular question. And then before we end this particular part of the lecture, with regards to activity 4, I'd love to hear all of your personal ethical dilemmas that you have experienced. And just remember that this is completely anonymous. No one will even know who it is that actually posted something. But I just thought, let me share my own personal dilemma that I experienced as a student. So during my 3rd year of studies, I was doing accounting 3, and accounting 3 was a bit of a difficult subject. And we were required to write, I think it was on the groups section within accounting 3. And I can still remember we had a very tight test timetable. And I was so tempted to write the sick test. And I was like, okay, but am I actually sick? And I was like, nope, I'm not actually sick, but I actually just want to buy some time. And a friend of mine was like, there's this doctor that's like selling these sick notes, and I think he's charging like about 150 Rand, but think about it, you can pay the 150 Rand and you'll actually have like a full 7 days extra to study. And I can still remember, I was like, that actually sounds like a really good plan. But then there was just this little voice in my head that was like, but it's actually not the right thing to do. And I was like, okay, but I can do so well in this assessment. And then I decided, okay, I will not write the sick test. It just felt so wrong. And I decided not to go ahead with it. And I'm so glad that I made the right decision, because 3 months or so after the assessment and that, this particular doctor that was selling, or inverted commas, selling these sick notes actually got caught. And there was this massive investigation into this doctor, and things actually just got really bad. And students that actually did make use of this doctor or whatever it is also affected. And it was just like a big saga, and it was like such a mess. And I was so thankful that I actually made the right decision, because had I made the decision to go and write that sick test, I actually had my qualification online. And so that was just my personal ethical dilemma. And I would love to hear from you, what were some of your personal ethical dilemmas that you experienced? And it doesn't have to be just adversity, it can be any ethical dilemma. So I just want to thank you so much for your time. I trust that you all enjoyed this lecture, and I'll see you in the next part where we will be looking at a practical RIMS lecture.